Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is episode 328. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. And my co-host is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation. And also, he is the host, one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Seth, can you believe it? The Cardinals are 5-0. This is something that literally neither one of us has seen in our lifetime. What is this? How is this life covering a team that's undefeated? Because guess what? Whether you're a fan that's not a Cardinals fans, like I can't imagine what it would be to be a beat writer, reporter, sports writer, or even a fan of a team that's not undefeated. It's fun.
Yeah, it's completely different, and now we get to complain about wins. I mean, when does that ever happen?
We get to nitpick wins. This is the thing. So they're 5-0. They play a very tough game against the San Francisco 49ers, 17-10. So we've got a lot to talk about this game because they're 5-0, but it was both a good game and a bad game in a lot of ways. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. We're going to look at both we're going to react to the offensive part of the game. We're going to talk about the defense. We're going to talk about the injuries because that was the war of attrition is beginning to settle in on the Cardinals roster. And then we'll look ahead to their Week 6 matchup on the road against the Cleveland Browns. And I have to say, first and foremost, I feel like the Cardinals have now gone 2-0 in this 3-game stretch where I said they needed to go 2-1 to prove that they're a legitimate team. And the perfect thing is that they have remained unbeaten. I mean, so they're undefeated, yes, but they've remained unbeaten in the division and in the conference. So they are now 2-0. Now, granted, I will say they started out. I think they start out 2-0 last year in the division and then lost the last 4. But this is different this year. So they're 2-0 in the division, which puts them ahead. Everyone else has a conference loss, has a division loss. That they're ahead of everyone because they're undefeated. But they also have the tiebreaker that they haven't lost to the NFC yet. And so the Cardinals are just sitting in a really good place, but 17 points offensively. What was your take about how they played offensively in that game against the 49ers?
I think the best word to describe it was lethargic. They just seemed almost bored at times. Like and that's, I think, a good thing sometimes, because really good teams can turn it on when they need to. And I think this game, you saw that. They came out hot. They marched on the field with, basically it looked like it was going to be a runaway, right? That first drive, you get a pick, you go down and score, and it just seemed easy. Then the second drive, I think they punted. They went 3 and out and punted, and it was like, okay, not a big deal. And then they had the Maxx Williams injury. They had Kyler took a bad sack on the drive right before the half. And they came out and they were, a little discombobulated, and it just looked like they had no sense of urgency. It seemed like they knew if they needed to, they could just turn it on at any point. And quite frankly, they did. I mean, they went down, threw a touchdown. They had I would call it the DeAndre Hopkins series, where they just basically relied on Hopkins. And then They got the ball back, in a close game, up 7 with, I think there was about a little over 4 minutes to go, 4:12 if I remember correctly. And one of the biggest complaints about Cliff and Kyler, they did exactly what they needed to do and closed it out. They didn't even give the ball back. I mean, and those 3 drives, I think, are what frustrates you about the rest of the game and about how lethargic and just kind of disinterested at times they look this week. And that's unfortunate because, one of the things about being a very good team or a contending team is that every week has to be played at a high level. And it's hard to keep that intensity for, in this case, 17 weeks of the regular season. I mean, it rarely wanes in the postseason, right? But for 17 weeks to keep that focus, to keep that intensity, it's tough. And I think we saw this week, you saw that waning interest maybe a little bit on the offensive side of the ball. And it was, it's disappointing, but at the end of the day, I thought it was interesting that, when they wanted to turn it on, they didn't seem to have any problems turning it on and just kind of imposing their will, even offensively, against the 49ers.
For me, I didn't view it so much as lethargy or lack of interest. I think for the first time all year, a defense has really punched them in the mouth. The 49ers, what we talked about last week is that their defense isn't that good, and I think we probably misspoke on that. I believe that their secondary is not that good. However, that there's one thing where the 49ers match up real well against the Cardinals is they have a very good defensive front. Their front 4 is elite, honestly. And we can look at some of the games that they've had. So the 49ers, honestly, in their 5 games, they have 3 great defensive games. And then they have 2 really bad stinkers. So they gave up 442 yards to the Lions. However, they were up big, and a lot of that came in garbage time. So that's, to be honest, Detroit did most of their damage in the fourth quarter when they were already up by 25. The Eagles, they only gave up 306. Now, the Eagles' offense is hot and cold. We don't know what to expect with them. Despite giving up 30 points to the Packers, Green Bay did not touch 300 yards of offense. They only had 298 yards of offense. And then Arizona comes in for 338 and gets the win. Seattle, 457. And so what you have is an inconsistent San Francisco defense. And the Cardinals, I think they found that this was the hardest it was to be consistently effective because they've been so much fun to watch offensively, and this is the first time a team has really challenged them defensively. And here's what it comes down to. Those bad sacks. Kyler's been able to avoid those. And I will say this, Kyler gets away with it most of the time, but he wasn't. So DJ Jones beat him inside. Josh Jones got beat really bad on the one. There was no mistaking that. But one thing Kyler does, he does really deep drops and doesn't stay in the pocket. So one thing he doesn't do usually is step up into the pocket. So if, say, the 49ers, you've got Nick Bosa and D Ford or Eric Armstead are on the outside, and they rush around the edge, what a normal pocket quarterback is going to do is when it looks like they're getting past the tackle, they'll step up in the pocket, which will allow the tackle to then further push the defensive lineman further back out of problems. Kyler doesn't do that. He'll take a 10-step drop, and then he creates some of the pressure on him. And normally he can outrun the guys. However, some guys you can't outrun. He couldn't outrun Nick Bosa on that one play. He got into trouble on another play. And so those really big losses, they've avoided really mostly since his rookie year. And he got a couple of them that got him in trouble, that got him out of rhythm. On another sense, they lost Maxx Williams, which was, and I will say this, that hasn't, they fear a season ending. Cliff Kingsbury didn't have any updates on Monday, but if you saw the field, it was almost immediately the players were calling for the trainers. They were on their knees, and then before he was carted off, the entire Cardinals team went across the field to wish him well. I don't know if I've ever seen that. And like, if there's one thing I've learned over the years is that players know when a player has a serious injury. And they don't even see it happen, but they know when something is really, really wrong. And that, we've seen that time and time again, where that someone who has an impact or an important player, and there is this sort of lull that happens, and that kind of takes the life out of them. And I think it took a little time to kind of get back into rhythm. It was great down the stretch to see some lock in. I think Kyler he didn't stay as locked as he could have because he faced a little adversity. But I'm pleased with it all, because even with everything that happened, they didn't the offense wasn't bad, but it wasn't elite. They never gave up their lead. They never trailed. They never even gave up the lead. They were never tied. And so the offense was doing just enough. And so what actually I'm really pleased about is the fact that a game where they weren't firing on all cylinders, because it looked like they were just going to roll through the season offensively. We know that they can have hiccups and still survive, because the offense, even though, like you said, would look lethargic, they didn't panic. When we've seen the Cardinals in tight games, Cliff Kingsbury, it seems to get a little, I guess so, get a little nervous and try to get out of his own element, out of his own way, and kind of varying from the game plan. And they didn't do that. They're sticking to a game plan. They're continuing to put pressure on him. The only thing that I didn't like was, I don't mind the field goal attempt at the end of the half, but the way they ended up going about it was stupid, because with 13 seconds left, it looked haphazard and chaotic, which led to a really bad kick by Prater at the end of the half. But overall, offensively, I didn't hate what I saw, because I knew that the 49ers, in a divisional game where they've already lost 2 in a row, they needed that game, and they were playing with a rookie quarterback. And so, when the rookie quarterback's getting their first start, you know what that defense is thinking. Though they amp it up a notch, especially against a division rival, knowing that they've got to take it up a step to be able to help their young quarterback.
Yeah, and one of the things that was big in this is that, can they win games when Kyler is not at his best, or when that offense is not at its best? And I mean, it's crazy to say that, because from just a statistical standpoint, he played well.
Yeah, 239 passing yards, a touchdown, no turnovers, 104.1 passer rating. I mean, he played well. He did have a couple of dropped snaps. Obviously, the 2 bad sacks. But you look at his game line, you're like, that's good. I mean, he didn't turn the ball over, which is a big deal. So despite some of the lack of production, they protected the football really well.
Yeah, and that's, where it comes from, and what they needed. And it's interesting because, as you said, a lot of it comes down to perception, and perception is that the offense was just not all there. But I just think it was so hit and miss during the game that it just felt deflating based on what we've seen all season. I mean, this was clearly the worst offensive game of the season. But when you look at, the overall outcomes of this season, and you kind of go through, I don't know how many people read Pro Football Reference, but like, if you go through the Pro Football Reference, they have the expected points, offense, defense, and special teams. And And this was, by far the Cardinals' worst offensive performance, only 1.7 expected points. But it was it was another solid defensive performance. And I think that more than anything is what is really interesting about this team is because they've had bad, they've had good offense and good defense, the game against Tennessee and Jacksonville. They've had great offense, the game against Jacksonville and LA. And they've had bend but don't break defense, and that was, the game against the Rams and the 49ers. And so you look at all of that, and it's like they can win in different ways. They've actually won games in different ways. And I think that's the big thing for them because they're not going to have all of that. They're not always going to be clicking on all cylinders at all phases of the game because that just doesn't happen for 17 weeks.
No, absolutely not. And this type of offense looks really good if you can keep it neat and packed in the game plan. This was not one of those games. Football fans know division games are weird. Division games are weird. The NFC West has always been a physical division. And so this was a dogfight. This was not the flashy type of game. It wasn't neat. It was hard fought. Honestly, it was a really good game. It was gripping football for watching the game. If you're not a Cardinals fan or a 49ers fan, what you saw was a fight. And the offensive production wasn't over the top, but it was good enough, and you got some good plays. Like, you had some highlights. The Rondale Moore catch at the sideline was wow. The 50-yard, the 33-yard, the 30-yard catch by Hopkins, and then following up with that catch in the end zone was amazing. And then the fact that Hopkins makes that sideline catch and drops his bum onto the ground before going out of bounds to keep the clock running, that is also. And they were doing that without a tight end. I will say this. Maxx Williams' impact on the offense, I think, is quite tangible. And without him, I think the fact that he's been healthy has been a big factor in just how good that they've been. They lost him. Chase Edmonds was 100%, and then they lose Rodney Hudson, who's been the anchor inside that line, and they were able to put points on the board when they needed to with Max Garcia at center. So it wasn't a great offensive performance, but in many ways it was very satisfying still.
Yeah, and when you look at the overall outcome, I think people underestimate the injuries. Between Max getting hurt and what he means in the short passing game and obviously in the run game, and then Rodney getting hurt, it really became a difficult battle for the Cardinals in game to make those adjustments. And not that Max, like you said, Garcia played poorly by any means, but it's just a reality that when a guy goes down that's that important, Max Williams and Rodney Hudson, it's really hard in game to make two adjustments to guys that are so important to your running game.
Right. Let's move on. So coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the defense, which there's a lot to like about what they did defensively. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And what we get is a defensive performance is fantastic. 10 points. They were outgained. But they pick up what did you think of that defense? Because I want to describe it like this because it's kind of funny. We said it off the air. When you're watching the defense on the field, you feel like they're a bad defense. And then at the end of the day, you look at the box score, you look at the stats that they've had all year, and they're a good defense. But it's really confusing based on what you see on the field, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the reality becomes at the end of the day that they do a couple of things. One, they don't give up a ton of points. Right now, they are sixth in points allowed per game at 19 points per game. That's obviously a huge thing. Number two, they force a ton of turnovers. I believe they're third in the NFL in turnovers forced, which is because they forced 10 so far this season. That is, I don't think people understand that forcing turnovers and then holding teams to not scoring is the obvious, like, oh, duh, that means they do a good job on defense. But they're not great in bulk categories. They are eighth in yards passing, which isn't bad, 28th in yards rushing, which is really bad, 31st in yards per attempt rushing, but third in turnovers, third in turnover percentage. It's crazy. They're fifth in starting field position and fifth in defensive time of possession, meaning that they don't stay on the field a lot. And again, that just stems from being able to force turnovers. And then points per drive. That's where it's really important. Teams, I don't know why, tend to, it seems like, go for it a lot, or not settle for field goals, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And it plays into the Cardinals game.
You know what I think it is? I think it's fear of their offense that does that. Now, granted, part of that was with the 49ers, they went for it 5 times on fourth down. And I think that had, in some part, to do with the fact that they had a kicker they just signed off the street. And so they don't know him that well. Because the Cardinals, opponents have gone for it on fourth down 10 times. Only one team, the Chicago Bears, have faced more fourth downs this season than the Cardinals. There's just a number of defensive metrics that you look. Obviously, the points. You look at their third down defense. They're giving up yards in the rushing game. And it's weird because you think, well, why don't they just run more? Here's an interesting thing. They're not always bad. They're inconsistent against the run. And then on the second half, they turn it up. I'll have to look at it again. But they're third in third down defense. There's the Carolina Panthers who are giving up. Opponents are only converting on 25.5. The Detroit Lions, 30.6, and the Cardinals are 31.6. And that includes a game, mind you, where the Rams went 6 for 11. So you take that game out, and you're looking at probably the number 1 third down defense in the league. And why do you consider that a little bit? Because the Rams have the number 2 third down offense in the league. And so they are getting off the field on third down. Their issues tend to be defensively because for some stretches where they don't get to third down. So they're losing first and second down to the picking up first downs. And here's another stat that I bet you didn't know. The Cardinals have not given up a 100-yard receiver yet this year. And in the NFL, where passing is king, they are performing quite admirably against the pass. And it kind of goes to this. They were 10th in the league in pass defense last year with barely adequate cornerback play. Patrick was good and sometimes horrible. Trey Kirkpatrick was passable. He wasn't bad, but he definitely wasn't good. And they had the 10th best pass defense in the league. Right now, they're 8th in pass defense. They haven't allowed a 100-yard receiver, and that's one of the main reasons why they're not giving up points, is because right now in the NFL, the passing game rules, if you can run the ball, that's great. But if you don't have a passing game, you're not going to win football games, and their pass defense has been fantastic. And it's really interesting because the other factor is they're not really getting to the quarterback, but didn't you think that J.J. Watt had himself the best game that he's had so far for the Cardinals?
Yeah, he was super impactful. He was making plays in the backfield, which, for him is the biggest thing. They need him to they need him to really wreak havoc. And the last two games, he's really become kind of the JJ Watt of old that we saw in plays last year. And I think, he's still not going to be.
He's the J.J. Watt of old without the stats. He's not
right.
He's not finishing with sacks right now. Those will come. I don't know if he's going to get to double digits or anything, but
oh no, probably not. I mean,
he's impacting when the way he's playing right now. He's definitely causing problems, and he had 2 quarterback hits, 2 or 3 hits. He had 2 tackles for loss. He knocked down a pass. It was really, even Chandler Jones, who didn't have a sack or a hit. He drew a couple of holding calls. They were getting Trey Lance off his spot. And I will say this, last year when they faced Tua Tagovailoa in his second major league start, there was at least film. So when Trey came in against in the previous week after Garoppolo got hurt, see, they were running the same game plan, and so they couldn't scheme or plan anything for Lance. You saw what they had. This is the first look really anyone's had at a full week of preparation for Trey Lance. He looked both good and bad a lot, but the Cardinals were doing that and selling out against the run. So they showed a lot of 8-man fronts. They only went with 3 defensive backs a lot, and they were doing that with their number 3 and number 4 corners because Marco Wilson and Byron Murphy were that. So you're getting Rob Alford, Antonio Hamilton, and then when they went nickel, Jace Whitaker, who was part of the problem last year against Miami when the Dolphins put up 34 points. And they managed to put up only 10. And I know that part of that is that Trey Lance just isn't there yet. But, I don't know, especially with a mobile quarterback like that who is legitimately a running threat. It's hard to completely shut down an offense like that because no matter what you do defensively to stop the scheme, and we've seen it with the Cardinals, Trey Lance's his running ability is a problem and will be a problem if he ever figures out the passing game, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, more than anything, I wonder if he's going to make it through a season, right?
Are you getting RG3 vibes in that sense?
No, more like Cam Newton, like that he probably could have that kind of 3 to 4 year run where he's got a meteoric rise, but then it's going to be a hard fall because, it's one of the things I talked with some buddies about when it comes to quarterbacking right now, and everybody's so athletic and everybody's so big and fast. And then you look at the quarterbacks and they're being asked to run more. They're being asked to do more. And a lot of these guys, and Trey was one, and then Joe Burrow this weekend was another, they don't know how to protect themselves. And you look at what Kyler does, and takes some bad sacks that we get frustrated with, but what he doesn't take? Hits.
Right. He never gets hit hard because whether you like it or not, if he gets grabbed at all, he goes down. He doesn't try to fight through things. He'll get out of bounds.
But you look at Trey Lance may miss the next game, and they're going on a bye week right now,
right?
Because of a sprained knee. We saw the rise and fall of Cam Newton in 5 seasons, from rookie of the year to MVP to out of the league, and that's the thing that happens. And I don't. Did you see the Joe Burrow hit on Sunday? I'm sure you were otherwise occupied.
No, I didn't. I heard about it.
Yeah, he got absolutely murdered, and it was because he didn't protect himself. Daniel Jones knocked himself out trying to score a touchdown. At the end of the day, winning is obviously super important, but longevity of playing time is just as important. And man, that's what I would worry about most about Trey right now is can he stay healthy for a full season and for a long career? And and then also is he tall enough to throw passes? Because I mean, 4 tip passes in a game. What is he? I mean, 5'9", 5'10". Jeez,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, when you look at it, they did a great job against against a guy that's got athletic ability, and quite frankly, I was really happy that anytime that he did run, they looked to punish him. Did you notice that?
Yes.
Like there was nothing dirty, there was nothing towards the head or anything like that.
Well, especially since he wasn't sliding. So if you're not going to slide, you're going to hey, put a body on him, put a hat on his body so that he feels that contact.
Right. And you know what, dude? If you don't want to slide, you're gonna feel this, and that is, like
that hit at the goal line was one of the most violent hits you will see. My word, how Isaiah Sullivan sold out on that hit. Tanner Vallejo as well. And a number of this, just overall, Chandler Jones chasing after him. And that's the sort of play when you're like, you don't necessarily, now granted on a 4th down, you have to sell out as a quarterback for that situation. But imagine if that were Kyler Murray in that situation. You would never want to see that happen ever. But my word, that hit was so violent.
It was. And obviously, I was honestly a little surprised that Isaiah had to be checked for a concussion because I watched it 3 or 4 times and it did not seem like he had his head involved.
No, he didn't. See, he didn't. He was shaken up, and I think how league protocol goes is I think probably when he made that hit and didn't get up right away, the independent physician in charge of that made an automatic call. He says, "Oh, big hit. He's not getting up right away. We got to evaluate him."
Yeah. And so between him, Zaven had some hits. I mean, Buddha's always going to bring it more than any player probably in the league, especially when you look at it from a pound for pound perspective. But man, I mean, it was crazy to see how physical this team was playing in it. And I know it's been a complaint on Revenge of the Birds, probably dating back to when you were running the show there. And it was just, that the fact that the corners were not physical, and now that's like the opposite problem. It's almost like, hey guys, you got to stop playing so physical at times. But then at the same time, you're like, you know what? I'd rather you guys get flagged for physicality and all of this than be the guy that is finding the sideline and running away from contact when you got to take down. When you got to take down Trey Lance or Trey Sermon or, Elijah Mitchell or Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, like that's a physical team. So,
well, I love the cornerback play. And honestly, Vance Joseph gave Trey Lance a little bit of the Team Tebow defense and challenged him. Now, they didn't stop the run great. Well, mainly Trey Lance was the running problem. And that's simply because it's the same thing with Lamar Jackson. Kyler Murray provides problems, but he's also often not looking to run. And Lance is escapable for other reasons because he's much bigger and more physical, much like a Cam Newton, much like a Lamar Jackson. And so I think they did a good job against the run overall. It was just frustrating to see Lance get them, but we saw that Colin Kaepernick would do the same thing. Russell Wilson's done the same thing for years. It's just a dimension you have to weather, and when you play, you have to keep everything else locked down and neat defensively, discipline wise, so that you don't let the other things, so you avoid the really big plays, which they've really done a good job this year, except for that busted coverage against the Vikings. They've really done a good job of avoiding big plays. They've kept everything in front of them, and then they get them to third down. I was like, I just really like what we're seeing, and I liked the adjustment that we saw, because the Cardinals played defensively. They schemed differently than we've seen all year, where they went with 4 down linemen and 4 linebacks on the field, going with the 8-man front. Really challenging it, and I was really happy with the play of Antonio Hamilton, who, my goodness, what a street pickup! It does this not feel like Antonio Hamilton is on par with the Marcus Cooper pickup from like a few years ago?
Yeah, it does, and he's one of the guys that I'm talking about, and almost to his own detriment at times. He just plays so physical, and
he plays cornerback the way he plays special teams, which is fun.
Right, and that's the thing is you watch him and you're like, dude, you gotta calm down. But at the same time, as you said, he plays it like he's playing cornerback. You look at his snaps in his career, and this is kind of what is always fun and also baffling to me for these things. You look at where he's played in his career, what he's done in his career. And he is, let's knock on wood so he doesn't get hurt, but he is literally 22 snaps away from his career high in snaps played. 22 snaps. And he still only started 1 game here. So it's not like he's out of control or, playing it. He's still only played 1 game. And so that's what's fun about him. And you said it, like, this dude saw 236 snaps in 18 on special teams, 372 in 19, and then 330 last year when he was in Kansas City. He played 133 in 19 snaps on defense, and then 135 snaps in last year. He's at 113 snaps this year already. 113. And the most he's ever played in the season is 135. Like, this dude's probably going to end up matching his career total in snaps in this season, barring, God forbid, an injury. Poor guy. So, yeah, it's just crazy to see guys making the most of their chances. I mean, you look at it, Lecky Fotu and Rashard Lawrence are playing super well right now. Zach Allen had a career game
goodness.
in this game. He looked like JJ Watt. I mean,
right. That's kind of what they kind of wanted out of him. And his name was called more often against the 49ers than I've heard his name called the entire year. He's really been kind of invisible. And we've seen that from Allen, is like he just disappears. Like, he's on the field, but he doesn't really do anything. And then there's games where he just shows up and he's a tackle machine. Like last year against Seattle, he had 11 tackles and 3 tackles for loss, something like that. It was something insane. That's the kind of potential he has, but he's still inconsistent. But hopefully he kind of has turned a corner, because especially with the Browns coming up, that defensive line needs to come up big.
Yeah, they do, and they need him to be incredibly, aggressive, physical. They need him to play hard against the run. They need him to make plays in the backfield, and when they give him reps, he needs to make the most of them. And this game, he completely did that. I mean, he was literally the second best front, probably 7 defensive player in the game behind Watt. And like, that's not a knock on how well Isaiah or Zaven played. And like I said, Rashad and Lecky both played well. Chandler had a nice game. I mean, everybody played well, but Watt and Allen were literally unblockable at times.
It was good to see. Anything else of note with the defense to point out?
No, I just think we need to be really positive about the fact that Robert Alford has been a godsend this year.
Oh my goodness.
And it's just, it's so fun to see. And like, you've got to feel so good for him. Like, just to see him
2 years being out,
way.
with being out for the season at his age in his 30s, players don't get opportunities like that. And so to come back on the cheat for the Cardinals to believe in him enough to bring him back, and then to get the opportunities had. 5 games in, it looks like he's rounding into form. He played what? He played the most that he's had in any game this year, so it's the most snaps he's gotten in a game since 2018. That's not insignificant by any means.
No, it's not. And that's, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's so fun to watch a guy that's persevered and now having not just success, but playing at a high level.
Coming on next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll come back and talk about some injuries and what we think the Cardinals should do. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We're back to talk about something that's not so pleasant, and that's a very touchy situation injury-wise. Ray Hudson went down with a rib injury. Maxx Williams goes down with what appears to be a gruesome knee injury. Cardinals are really hard about getting any sort of information out. The report is that they fear it's season-ending. Cliff Kingsbury has it, but if you watch the replay, it was bad. His knee bent sideways. It was bad.
I think we know it's not broken, is what they said. That's all we know for sure right now, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the feel. And good. At least it wasn't like a busted knee, but ligament damage. It would be if he can come back at all this year, it would be shocking.
It would be baffling if it's nothing more than like a grade 2 sprain. Shocking, in fact. And it's disappointing because he's playing at an incredibly high level this year. And then when you look at his history and the injury proneness of his history, it had nothing to, like, that was a completely separate thing, right? Like, that was
like, it wasn't the ankle issue that he had. It wasn't it's not the hamstrings. This was just it was a violent hit.
Yeah, a freak play to try to take down a big guy.
I'm not going to say that was a dirty play, because defensive backs have no other way to to challenge a guy of Max's size. Because you hit him too high, then you get flagged.
Right. And we've seen Buddha go in like that. Like, let's be honest. Like,
yeah, George Kittle left a couple of games because Buddha went low, and
he's very violent and he's very aggressive with it. And it's just, it's just an unfortunate thing.
Yeah, it's just too bad. But which leads to the question: if he's done for the season, the Cardinals are left with Darrell Daniels, Demetrius Harris, and then if they maintain Ross Travis, or is it Travis? No, it's Ross Travis. But
Ross Travis, yeah.
I see that. I'm like,
and you can't trust him because obviously he has 2 first names.
Yeah, you can't. I can't. So everyone's saying they need to trade for a tight end.
I mean, that would be great. Who are they
should they trade for a tight end?
I mean, if you can get the guy for a 5th or 6th rounder, yeah, absolutely. Like,
but here's the thing: is there anyone worth getting that you're going to get for a 5th or a 6th round pick?
I mean, maybe you can go get Dan Arnold,
and like that's the name that everyone can. We can go get Dan Arnold for Jackson, but can you? They just traded for him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They just traded for him.
And here's the thing. If the Cardinals really liked him that much, do you think that they would have let him go?
Right.
They didn't like him at $3 million a year.
No, they didn't. And that's the thing, is you look at it and you just have to understand that there are positions every season where you're going to be thin. And we talked about that early, right? Like, we talked about it at the beginning of the year, and tight end was one of them. And Max was playing at a level that basically made it unnoticeable.
Yeah.
And now he's out, and but here's what I'll say. And I know this is tough for people to kind of hear and even grasp at times, but had you heard of Dalton Schultz much before this year?
I've heard the name.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he's having an all-pro type of year in Dallas. Had you heard of Tanyan before last year?
No one had. Nope.
Yeah. And so that's the thing, is like, I'm not saying that those are going to be the guys, but that's who he'll play like. But I mean, again, can you go get OJ Howard? And you're not going to trade him right now until Gronk's back, right? And would they trade him anyways? Can they go get
Zach
you know,
Ertz. I mean, again,
right,
then you're on the hook for big money.
right, and you're probably going to have to. And there's a reason they haven't traded for him yet, and quite frankly, it's because nobody wants to pay the price, and two, we don't even know if he's out like actually available. Um, I'm just kind of going through the names here, and you look at it.
I saw on Twitter someone suggesting to go get Jonnu Smith. I love Jonnu Smith. However, that contract, whew, and he's not getting used much. He's not getting used much so far for the Patriots. But I love that guy. But you have to think, how much is it going to cost to get in terms of draft capital? Smith's getting paid a ton of money, and why would the Patriots trade him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they would have just drafted Tommy Tremble, like I said, this wouldn't even be an issue.
It's true. It's
nobody
true.
Listens.
He's been good. He's been good.
But I mean,
and so
you look around the NFL, like you just look at it. I mean, Devin Assisi, there, he's the young guy in New England. He's obviously not going to get the ball much. So do you take a shot on him? He was one of the 2 tight ends they drafted last year in the draft. What about like a Nick Boyle in Baltimore? Can you go get a guy like him?
No, they need him to bait opponents into penalties.
Right. and like a Foster Moreau in Las Vegas, like these are the names. Brevin Jordan in Houston, like these are the names that are probably attainable for a 5th or a 6th round pick. Like you're not going to get somebody else. And they drafted, like I said, Dalton Keene and the Devin Assisi guy in those are the names in New England that maybe you can go get one of them because they obviously signed Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. So maybe you can go get one of them and you can flip, a 5th, and that'll move up to a 4th based on playing time. But I just don't know where you go get somebody. 2 names that are available in free agency. I mean, Tyler Eifert, and he's banged up and old. And Trey Burton, who's banged up and old. We know they brought in Richard Rodgers to the practice squad. So
yes, that was reported Tuesday night. They actually brought in 3 tight ends for. Let me pull those names up. I didn't write about it yet, but so
I'm actually shocked they didn't bring in like Jordan Thomas or bring Jordan Thomas back, because they had him here a little bit last year, and so like you would think that he knows the offense. So that tells you all you really need to know about him. I mean, there's a guy like, they can go get like a Tim Tebow, right?
Richard Rodgers, Luke Stalker, and David Wells were the guys they brought in.
Right. Yeah. So these are the names, guys.
And here's the thing: it's Cliff Kingsbury believes in Darrell Daniels.
There's a reason he was the number 2 tight end still.
Right. And, Demetrius Harris still is shown as the number 2 guy. And part of it, he's still new to the offensive system. Harris can do some of the things that Max can, except he's less reliable as a pass catcher. He has all the skills to do it. He just hasn't put it together. Darrell Daniels gives you something. Interesting concept. Interesting thing that Cliff said about Ross Travis is that they really like what he has to offer in the passing game, and it's almost like they see a little somewhere between Maxx Williams and Dan Arnold, because obviously Dan Arnold give you different matchup look at his height, but Ross Travis, he's basically Dan Arnold, 6'6", 248. He's a big Dan Arnold, and so he's a guy to watch out for probably next year, and maybe they can use him the way they wanted to use Dan Arnold last year, and he gets that opportunity now. He will probably, here's the thing. I don't see Cardinals making a trade for a tight end. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. We've talked about this quite a bit, but when you look at Steve Keim's MO, he makes moves at positions that usually you're like, huh? And he didn't make moves at the corner position when guys were getting hurt, or when they just had Byron Murphy and Marco Wilson, right? Like Malcolm Butler left, and they were like, well, we're gonna roll with Antonio Hamilton and Luke Barku and Robert Albert. Like, we'll be all right. And
guess what?
They're all right.
They're all right.
And last year Max didn't play, and what they do? They rolled with
Darrell Daniels and
Daniels, Dan Arnold, and tight end of the week, basically.
It was towards the last half of the season. It was they'd bring up a guy twice from the practice squad and then go with another tight end for a couple of weeks because they didn't want to put him on the actual roster. It was they had Jordan Thomas, they had Seth DeValve, they had Ian Bunting, there was another guy, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but it was someone else every single week. Pretty much.
And so it's crazy to think about, but I just don't even see them making a move.
I honestly, I think it's the same thing. I think they won't.
Well, I shouldn't say that. Not that they wouldn't make a move, but that the move's going to be free agency guys in and out.
And the guy that they brought, like Richard Rodgers, they're not going to put him on the active roster right away, just because the way the practice squad system works is that it allows you to teach them a little before you have to throw them into the fire and things like that. So yeah, a little bit worried about Rodney Hudson. However, if you look at some of the offensive production they had last year with Mason Cole, then they're probably
should be able to.
They should be able
to mimic that with Max Garcia.
And
right?
Max Garcia is not new to starting. He was a starter for years in Denver. He's a big, strong guy. He's a veteran guy, and he's a year removed now from his recovery from the ACL, and I think that's significant. When he stepped in at guard, he was solid. When he stepped in at center, he was solid. And this guy that they had on the roster 3 years in a row as depth from the offensive line on a 1-year deal. I think this year you really like that. You like what you've seen. He's gotten stronger. He's more well-versed in the offense, and you can rely on him. And it's really interesting is that, they have depth. They have starting caliber players they can rely on. Their bench with Justin Murray and Max Garcia. But let's move on, because we got a big game coming up over the weekend. Coming on next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about their Week 6 matchup against the Cleveland-Browns, which is going to be a tough one, especially if they're shorthanded. That's coming on next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. What do you think we can see from the Cleveland Browns? Because they're now only 3-2. I will say that heading into this year, I thought the Browns could potentially. I had them probably near the same tier that had to prove it, but Chiefs, Bills, and then like Ravens and Browns all together, under the next sub tier of top teams in the AFC.
Yeah, and you look at the Browns and what they've done. They're coming off, I believe, back-to-back losses, right?
No,
they started 3-0.
They were 2-0, lost one, 1-1, then lost one.
Okay, so yeah, no offense, I don't follow the Browns that closely. But yeah, you look at it. I mean, this is a team that does one thing extremely well, and they love to run the football, and that is going to be the big thing for the Cardinals is, can they withstand the dominating rushing attack of the Cleveland Browns? And their two backs are both phenomenal, and Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and You look at it, they're literally number one in rushing attempts, number one in rushing yards, number one in rushing touchdowns, and number one in rushing yards per attempt. They're 27th in passing attempts, 25th in passing yards, 30th in passing touchdowns. Like,
and defensively, they're hit or miss.
yeah, they've had some just completely dominating games. You look at it, um, they gave up 6 against the Bears and Justin Fields' first start. Okay, we can kind of throw out the window. No big deal. They gave up 7 to the Vikings, who put up 30 whatever on the Cardinals. And then they gave up 21 to the Houston Texans, and they were trailing, I believe, at the half in that game. Let me go back and check. Oh no, they were tied in that game at the half before Tyrod Taylor got hurt. And so, yeah, they were down 14-7, and then Tyrod got hurt, and then they came back and scored to tie it up, and then kind of ran away with it. But this isn't exactly what their fans and they expected. They've been good on offense. We talked about the running game. They've been good on defense, but outside of their rushing attack, they haven't been dominant. And then they've dealt with some injuries. I mean, you look at it, they've had to deal with missing Odell Beckham early in the season. He's back. Jadeveon Clowney's missed some games. Missed Myles Garrett's been banged up. They've missed David Njoku at times, and then they've missed Jedrick Willis, their young left tackle. And you look at it, they're a talented team. They really are. But like I said, Clowney didn't play this weekend against the Chargers. He's a phenomenal player. You look at Myles Garrett. He's playing at a really high level. I think he leads the NFL in sacks right now with 7. And unfortunately, it sounds like Chandler Jones won't get a chance to tie that up with him this week with his COVID-19 positive test. We're still waiting to see, but and Willis missed the game this week or last week against the Chargers. This is going to be an interesting game because it's clearly going to be the Browns' strength, which is their running game, against the Cardinals' weakness, which is their ability to stop the run. But the question becomes what Browns defense shows up. And the funny thing is they've only had 2 home games, and in their home games they've had their performance against the Bears, which again I feel like we can just throw out, don't you?
I mean, yes,
that didn't count.
Justin Fields, when he came in, he was not prepared for what happened.
Yeah, and then you've got their win over the Texans, which I mean wasn't really that impressive to me. They do a nice job offensively pretty consistently. They've had two I wouldn't say stinkers. I mean, the Minnesota game was a bit of a stinker, and they just really just dared Chicago to stop the run against when they beat the Bears, and so they only won 26-6. Look at their other games. They've had 2 games under 200 yards passing, and one game where they had 203 yards, and they're 3-0 in those games. 3-0 in games where Baker Mayfield's passed for 203 yards, 143 yards, and 199 yards. In their 2 losses, he's thrown for 304 and 301 yards. So, I mean, just kind of hit it on the head. How to beat them is really easy to say. Force Baker Mayfield to beat you. And if he does, then you know what? You got You figured out, or they had your number that day. If what we've seen this season is accurate, though, it won't be something that happens because their defense is likely giving up a bunch of points as well, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing is, so we've seen what the Cardinals can do against the run with what they did against Derrick Henry in Week 1. That's exactly the recipe to beat the Browns, because they treat Baker Mayfield in terms of how he runs the offense the same way that the Texans do with Ryan Tannehill. So if Nick Chubb, if they're limiting him early, and so the combination of early stops on defense and early points on offense is really going to change the game plan. It's going to flip the switch, kind of flip the story there, change the narrative of how you're going to have to game plan, because if the Cardinals get 10 to 14 points ahead, there isn't a coach in the NFL that will continue to just slow the game down with the running game. They will go to the pass because that's how you get back into games.
Correct. And I mean, at the end of the day, they're a good team. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Their 2 losses are to the AFC West leading Chargers, and then still the AFC favorites, I think, the Kansas City Chiefs, although they've looked susceptible the last couple of weeks. Those aren't bad losses. I mean, let's be honest, and they lost by combined 9 points in those 2 games. And meanwhile, they scored 71 points in those games. They just gave up 80. And so that's the thing, is if you make this a track meet, it plays into the Cardinals' hands more than the Browns' hands.
Absolutely, especially how well the Cardinals' defense has been playing, especially in the second half of games, which is why this is the game that I don't feel as bad if they lose. And there's a lot of reasons why they could lose this game, because
I mean, just look at the injury list, and
yes, they're banged up across the board on both sides of the ball. They're on the road.
I don't want to say you expect it, but like, you just look at that and you go, well, no, they're probably not gonna.
And it's it is the one plus. It's not a 10 a.m. start here. It's a 4 p.m. start back east. So it's a fantastic in terms of time frame. I was like, I love 1 o'clock games. I'm not a fan of 10 a.m. games personally, but
I mean, it is nice to get it out of the way and then have the rest of your day. But at the same time, we do prefer the 1 o'clock start, sleep in,
just
enjoy.
So we have time to prep for the game instead of getting up early to do it. But you guys, we're not complaining about our jobs, because our job is to talk and write about football. It's not a bad gig, guys. It's not a bad gig at all. So, but looking at this game, it's like, I don't feel confident going into this game.
Well,
that's the one thing. I don't expect the Cardinals to win. I know they can, but I don't go into this game with the expectation of a win because of everything that they're facing. A road game against a quality team who hasn't lived up to expectations yet. The Cardinals now have a target on their backs. Obviously, they're 5-0, and they are banged up. And so if there's a game, and honestly, an AFC game, that's an acceptable loss. It doesn't change anything in terms of tiebreakers. You can get away with an AFC loss if that's going to be your stinker.
And that's one. 2, you talked about the injuries. I mean, you're banged up, and I wrote about it a little bit. It has nothing to do with tanking or trying to lose the game or anything like that. But quite frankly, if Rodney Hudson's at 70%, don't play him. Like, because to your point, not only is it an AFC team, but this is a non-common opponent for the division breakdown as well.
Correct,
like,
because no one else plays the Browns that matter.
Right. This is the throw-in 17th game, and in that case, you have to look at it in that way of like, hey, they're going to lose. I mean, as good as we think they are right now, they are not going to go 17-0 and then run the table in the playoffs too, right? It's just not going to happen. And to your point, when you talk about acceptable losses, the only thing a loss does for them in this game is it doesn't give them that full 1-game lead it doesn't give them a 2-game lead on the Rams. It moves it back down to 1 game basically, because they now just hold the tiebreaker over the Rams. I think with the way the division's trending right now, obviously with Trey Lance getting his, start now.
Russell Wilson out for the next month to 2 months.
Yeah, Russell Wilson, I'm going to say 6 weeks. Just talking to my friends that are doctors that I work with and the orthos that I know, they don't expect him to be back sooner than 6 weeks. If it's 4, then good for Russell. But I think it's going to end up being 6. And you look at the stretch, like I said, Trey Lance may not even play in Indy next week, and that's the Sunday night football game, by the way. The 49ers hosting the Colts. But then you look at it, they go to the Bears. So they have Sunday night football. Then they go to Chicago. Then they play the Cardinals again. Then they have the Rams on Monday night. Their next 4 games, and they're sitting at 2-3. They could be completely out of it by week 10, which is just, did we see that coming at all? And then, you talked about it with Seattle without Russell Wilson. They're sitting at 2-3 as well. They've got Pittsburgh this week on Sunday night. Then they play the New Orleans Saints on Monday night, who are tied for the NFC South lead with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so it's just crazy to look at what the Cardinals can do. And that's why I think getting healthy, not loafing, not giving up, not trying, but getting healthy for the stretch run after the Cleveland game, where you've got a get right game against Houston. Then you host Green Bay
on Thursday night,
and then you go to San Francisco, but then you host Carolina as well. That's an incredibly important stretch. And right now, on the flip side, the Rams are in their lull period, basically. They have the Giants, the Lions, and the Texans their next 3 games. Now, remember, the Cardinals get to play all 3 of those teams. It's just not, in that order. And so, yes, we want the Cardinals to win. Yes, I think this is the first game that both of us are picking against the Cardinals since the Los Angeles Rams game.
Correct. And what is your prediction for the game?
And by the way, both times you and I have picked against them,
it's true.
They've won this year. So we're not trying to do that. It's not a jinx. We truly do believe that this is a game that's going to be tough to win. And I think that they end up losing this game 27-24 in a very close, tight game. And the Browns kick a field goal to win it late.
And I was literally going to say the exact same thing, 27-24. So I'll say 30-27. Same type of scenario. Either the Cardinals, give up. Either it's a touchdown to go ahead, and the Cardinals don't get enough yards, or Prater miss. Hopefully, it's not a Prater missing a field goal to tie the game. But it'll be a knockout fight, kind of like the 49ers game, but with more points. So it's not quite what Chargers-Browns was, but it's also not 49ers-Cardinals. It'll be somewhere in between, but it'll be relatively high scoring. And yeah, I see that happening, and I'm going to predict a loss, because if there's a week for the Cardinals to get a loss, this is the week that it's okay to do it.
Yeah, it is. And it's, like I said, it's more important that they they are healthy heading into that 5-game stretch, because you look at that 5-game stretch, starting with Houston at home, you get that game, then you get the Packers at home. And if they can somehow get out of that at 7-1, 8 games into the season, then they've got the gauntlet before they get into their soft part of the schedule. And let's be honest, the way that it sets up for the Cardinals, you would rather have that soft part of the schedule kind of later in the year than you would earlier in the year. And they've got a chance, after Carolina, at Seattle. Russell probably, that'll be pushing when he might be back. But I think, even if you get him first game back, you're probably in a good spot. So, yeah, they've got a really good chance to hey. I just don't think this is the week.
And I feel the same way. It'll be close, but I think the Cardinals come away losers this week. I'm going to predict it. I don't know for sure, but everything points to that with how things are going, and that's okay. But with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. And if we're not right, and we're looking at a 6-0 team that's going to take on the Texans, then the Cardinals are really in a good place. They're already in a good place at 5-5 now. Even playing mediocre football the rest of the way puts them at 11 wins. That's going to put them in the playoffs. I think even last week, the way starting 4-0, you look at the schedule the rest of the way, and there's no reason why they can't win 12 or 13 games, and you're looking at that right now. So we will be back again next week to talk about the Cardinals and the results over the Browns. Hopefully it's a win, but if not, we'll break that down as well. On behalf of the Rise Up See Red podcast, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always, and we'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Rise